go. Just to kick off, I noticed on your website you grew up with Harvey James as a nearby neighbour.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was my first guitar teacher.
Right. How much of an influence was that in getting...
Probably more that Ariel used to use the old Scout Hall, because Harvey lived there, used to use our Scout Hall as a rehearsal room.
Uh-huh.
So I used to go and sit on the beanbags and watch Ariel rehearse, which was pretty good. So they were probably more of an influence as a band than the whole, than just his guitar playing. But he went off to work with Richard Clapton a bit later, who's one of my sort of early heroes. So it was, pretty good.
Another name I saw mentioned there as a key figure in your early development was Greg Hildebrand.
Yeah. Well, he was actually came to our high school in the 70s as I'm not sure what he might have been an English teacher or something like that. And he was on that exchange program from the States. And by then I was sort of teaching guitar at lunchtimes and things like that. So he took me under his wing and taught me all the blind Blake sort of rolling thumb finger picking stuff. And I ended up working with him and Greg O'Leary at the Green Man in the early days, just sort of backing them up. And from there went on to Franciscus Henry and Dutch Tilders, all through Greg Hildebrand.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So in terms of songwriting...
You know Greg, do you?
Certainly the name sort of bobs up here and there, yeah.
Yeah. He's sort of very underrated. He's been in Australia, well, obviously since the 70s. But, yeah, an amazing player, But, he I suppose because he learnt a lot of that stuff, from the masters. He was a great teacher, Greg. I think he still actually teaches guitar, from memory.
So in terms of songwriters, who were the first to really inspire you to want to write yourself?
Probably, I'd always sort of mucked around with it, probably more from a guitar sort of stage, and I came to singing a lot later. But I'd always sort of written songs, but, like the Leo Kottke style, I suppose, or acoustic songs. And I boarded with a really nice young Jewish family when I was in sort of my late teens, and he had a lot of John Martin and Richard Thompson, and he was an English guy, and so a lot of that sort of English folk early stuff I really got into, especially John Martin, who's, again, another very underrated songwriter that you don't hear enough of.
No.
And especially John was an amazing guitar player as well. So I like that mix where it wasn't just sort of, it was the mix of both the guitar playing and the songwriting. And yeah, I suppose I listened to a lot of that folky stuff, obviously Neil Young and everything, when we're in the mainstream, but some of the obscure artists, Richard Thompson, who else? I liked some of the Canadian songwriters that were around at the time, yeah.
Talk about some of your previous bands. I noticed on your website Black Ruxton described as punk with a smile.
Yeah. Oh, they were actually... Well, that's got me back into guitar playing. I actually stopped playing for a while in the early 80s, and I was studying full-time at uni and just wasn't doing... I was playing at home, obviously, but not doing any gigs or anything like that, and hooked up with a girlfriend who was sort of called the punk princess of St Kilda at the time. She was a very good-looking girl, but she was very into that whole sort of Stooges punk black scene that was going on down here. And one of her girlfriends, and we met sort of through her, was her boyfriend was in a band which was called this Black Ruxtons, and it was just forming, and they didn't have a guitar player at the time, and they had some gigs at parties, so they suggested I sit in on lead guitar and with them just to sort of fill out the sound, and it sort of stuck. And he was actually running PBS Radio at the time, the singer, and very political, and they were quite a good little band, but very directions towards the New York Dolls and some of the Stooges and that sort of stuff. And we ended up going for quite a couple of years, and I ended up just really enjoying it, so I stuck with them. And wrote a whole album of songs for them, which they didn't like. They thought they were a bit too not sort of punk enough. And the drummer we had at the time sort of snuck off to the side and said, "Oh, I think those songs are pretty good. We should record them." So we went into the studio, and at that time, a little 8-track studio to do about 10 tracks would cost you about $250 for the day. So we went in one day and recorded a whole album in the one day, and came up very well. And we put it out to some pubs and things to see if they wanted the gigs, and got a lot of feedback, and ended up going to radio, and then got signed to Waterfront Records. And then one of them went number 3 on the college radio charts off that little $250 recording.
Wow.
So that's how Broken Head was born, out of Black Ruxton. But and that band went for like nearly 10 years, and we travelled the world, and it was a great time, But that was a bit like Neil Young on acid, I'd suppose you'd call it. It was basically my acoustic stuff I'd normally play, but I was using a 61 Jazzmaster, which I've still got, and a Marshall amp, which sort of took it into a whole new realm. But I remember getting a review in America which said these songs sound like they could easily be played around a campfire on an acoustic guitar, as well as the throng of the band. And that's that reviewer sort of got the idea of it.
Mm.
That was just a matter of doing what I do now, and amping up the valves, putting a lot of valves in between the signals.
You did base yourself in the States for a while after Broken Head. How do you look back on that time now in terms of the development of the music?
Well, I think it sort of probably brought to me where I am now, because originally when I started doing that, the grunge scene had died and there wasn't much music around, but there was certainly a lot of work for blues singers and guitarists. And I was based in San Francisco for a while and worked at blues bars and different bars. And they have more of a sign-up thing, so that a few of those places, they run, especially in San Francisco, they run blues starting at about 10 o'clock in the morning and go through till 4 in the morning. And how they do it is have a roster system of artists. So you'll sort of get maybe 2-3 hour shifts in a day, and so you roll up at 4 o'clock, and the guitarist that's on stage will walk off, and you just take his place, and the rest of the band might stay there. So you never quite know who you're playing with, but you sort of form your favourites by working with them for a while. And it's all blues standards, but the bands are because those guys play all day every day. You can sort of say, hey, let's do something that's in the key of G, and it's a 1-4-5 turnaround or whatever, and off they go. They sort of know it. So that was good, especially vocal, to getting your vocals going. But it's a bit the same as here. I found the blues scene when I came back. We formed a band called Blues Conversion, which did really well. It was a little 3-piece band. Then later we added a sax player, but they were a pretty amazing sort of style band, because they were like an R&B blues band. But again, it sort of narrowed us down. We were just sort of looking at a crowd of blokes with stubbies, sort of ogling you, watching you play guitar, And when I pulled away a bit from that, I wanted to do an acoustic album. Did the very first Hair of the Dog recording, which hasn't been commercially released, but we've picked the eyes out of it for later records. But it was just a acoustic recording done at home on Pro Tools. And I met Pete Fiddler sort of halfway through that process, so he added the dobros, and Dave Major, who's worked with me for about 16 years off and on in bands, he added some drums, and that sort of threw us in a whole new direction. We got a lot of airplay on alternative country stations, and picked up Tamworth and all that sort of stuff. So, and the first thing I realised that there's an audience there which ranged from 8 to 85. You've got such a range of audience that'll listen to that music, and there's actually girls in the audience and all sorts of stuff. So it's just it just makes that whole, from an artist point of view, it just makes that whole the whole scene of that alternative country stuff a lot more appealing than just being stuck in the blues, categorised into a blues area or somewhere else. Just watching a whole lot of guys drink stubbies.
Yeah.
So it certainly opened a whole new sort of lot of doors for us, and we love the sound, and we were able to develop, I suppose, not coming from that background. Pete Fiddler comes more from a bluegrass background. Dave Major, the drummer, has been in probably 4 bands with me, ranging from rock and roll bands through to blues bands. This was his first country effort, and I think having musicians who aren't really like a fay with the music that well means that they develop a unique sort of cross style, I suppose you'd call it. You know, and Dave's drumming is it's half rock and roll and it's half country. You know, he can do an amazing shuffle, and he can rock it out with the best of them. So it's an interesting mix, you know.
There is a real melting pot of roots music styles in the music you're doing these days. Is that very particularly important to you to have that diversity?
Well, it's sort of like people keep saying, oh, you know, they want the music sort of to be defined, and yet I say, look, I remember buying a Creedence record, you know, off the paper round when I was a kid, and I didn't have to go to a country section, or I didn't have to go to a certain section to buy that music. It was just classed as music, or as mainstream. And if anything, because I used to be into the Marshall Tucker band and bands like that, and some of them are quite obscure, even as a young kid. But you'd have to go to a country rock section, or they used to call it southern rock. You know, Leonard Skinner. What are they, a country band? Are they not? You know, so it gets a bit hard to define. You know, and we have the odd people go, oh, well, you're not really a country band. You know, we're like, well, so you know, what is Creedence not a country band, or is it? You know, like it gets a bit hard to define. But yeah, we're not, you know, strictly a twanging country band, I would call it. You know?
Can you pinpoint a time when you really felt you were developing a self-confidence in yourself as a songwriter?
Yeah, I think the Hair of the Dog album, which came out in about 2005, surprised me. You know, and some of the songs and stuff, I suppose, had come from a period of 10 years where I'd sort of been away, and I'd been in Mexico, and I'd seen a lot of the world, but I'd also, you know, probably had a lot of drinks and a lot of done a lot of damage, you know, to my own life, sort of thing. So I was surprised at the end of it when I actually went back and read the lyrics and went through what, you know, the depth of some of the stuff. And we had one situation with that album where we put it out, and a girl started, you know, writing to us from up north and all this sort of stuff. And a lot of the Aboriginal people that she worked with got right into the album. So I was starting to get letters from them, which was a real sort of, you know, eye-opener to the fact that, you know, you could reach some people subconsciously without sort of, yeah. So yeah, that was probably one of about the time. I think Watermelon was the first one where we sort of started getting overseas interest in the songwriting and all that sort of stuff. So that certainly, you know, pricked my ears up, and I started taking it a bit more seriously rather than just being a hobby band on the side. You know?
On top of your own songs, there's always there's a nice choice of covers spread through your CDs as well. What criteria do you use in choosing other people's material to cover, either on record or even on stage?
Hopefully that we can add something to it. So it's I think, you know, Everything Is Free, which we covered on Watermelon, is a Gillian Welsh song that she sort of does with Dave just on a acoustic guitar. It's quite slow, mesmerising, and I think once we added the drums and all the bass, it turns into a different animal, you know. And I get a lot of people sort of write to us on YouTube and stuff, and you know how they love the version of it, because it's not, I suppose it's not considered like a rock song, but I quite like the way Ryan Adams might approach when he does the cover, you know, he sort of makes it his own, and that's part of it. I think, you know, sometimes I was just saying that John Beeland was doing some live gigs with when he was out here for the recording, and we did Alcohol and Pills live, which he loved and suggested we put it on the record. So
yeah, John Beeland, how did you first come in contact with him?
He just basically wrote to me he picked up the email address somewhere. I think I had the email address on the Watermelon record, and I think he'd read the reviews we got 5 stars or 10 stars, I can't remember, in the one of the reviewing papers in America, and he'd read the review and bought the album and then contacted me directly. And I thought it was someone playing a joke on me that when I first got the email suggesting that we try and work together, and made contact with him and verified it was all real, and then away we went from there. So I actually posted him, which I thought at the time I was a bit dangerous, but he wanted basically my whole back catalogue and any new songs I'd written. So I burn them all onto CDs and send them over to him, and hoped that he wouldn't just rip them off. But he loved them, and from there he made a selection with a few of the tracks were from old albums, going back 15 years, and then a couple of the new songs that I'd written and a couple of covers. So he sort of put the whole thing together, and once we got it all, we knew which songs we were doing. I set up some bass recordings here. He flew over to Melbourne, and with the idea that we'd find a studio here and record the whole album. When he saw my home studio, he was fairly happy with that and said, well, why don't we do the basic tracks here? So we recorded all the basic tracks, ended up putting the drums down. Pete Fiddler did his lead stuff. I did all the vocals here, guide tracks, and then John took the whole lot back to Austin, Texas, added some overdubs, did some more work on it, got it all up to a fairly high level of production, and then I flew over with my partner, and we did some final recording, and that was the end of it. That from there it was completed.
So what particular qualities has he brought to the table as a producer?
Well, he's certainly made it a lot more radio friendly than I suppose, because of the punk background, I suppose. But I certainly love it when Pete gets going and there's a lot of distortion and that sort of edgy, Raikoudery type style that we can get. And a lot of people say, they love the production on Watermelon, which is, an album that I produced. It's a lot rawer. But, the moment we heard what John was doing, we're like, hey, that sounds American, or that sounds, you could hear that on the radio. Mm. I think with his knowledge, he does make a lot of hits, and it was an interesting cross mix, because he wrote a lot of the songs for the Bellamy Brothers and produced all their stuff, and his ear is a lot more commercial than mine, and it does open up a whole lot of doors to the band that would not normally be open, and it's one thing to write a really great sounding alternative record, but it's another thing to be in the mainstream and actually selling records, So
by the same token, he still has kept that honesty and rawness in this, and there's not too much spit and polish there.
Well, that was part of what he was attracted to, in that he said that's what we set out to do in the 70s, and I think there's something he's written there where it says it's been a long time since he's worked with a band that had that sort of sound and that attack level, and it's reminiscent, he says, of his early days with the Burrito Brothers and, Graham Parsons and all those. I don't think they were trying to write radio hits, they were just trying to write good music. So it's it's an interesting step that radio want to play that music now.
Yeah, that's right.
You've got, sort of, there's a howling sort of lap steel guitar there, and there's some pretty raw solos and not too much production where it's all totally overproduced, you know what I mean?
Mm.
So, yeah.
So as a songwriter, how important is it for you to gauge audience reactions to new songs when you present them live before choosing which ones to record?
Yeah, not that important, I think, because I think sometimes they miss, like a song that works well for us live can be quite up and rocking, and then there's a little quiet song in the background, and then that'll sort of punch out once you actually do the recording and the album. I sort of look more for an atmospheric, I suppose you'd call it. Mm. That once I put it down, it sort of tends to lay back a bit, and there's sort of like I call it a driving groove, or a certain melancholy that you get into. A lot of early Neil Young stuff has it. And it's like a little zone that the band goes into, and the listener goes as well. So I really love the songs that do that. So but again, there was a few songs that I reckon were really good that I presented to John that he didn't record on this album. So
Yeah.
it's and they're actually favourites when we play live. A couple of those songs, but they'll certainly make the next album.
So have you found a best time for songwriting? Obviously, you're busy with that, with other work outside of music. Is there a best time for writing?
I have to actually set time aside, so I don't write. I'm not one of those people that write every night, or even pick up a guitar every night, or work through that. I'll actually say, okay, Easter's coming up. We're going away for 5 days. Go somewhere where there's a log fire and take the guitar with me and probably write a whole album in 5 days.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of it's I store. I'm a bit annoyed with myself because the phone packed it in, and I had to change the phone over, and I forgot to get all my little recordings, because I'll actually just record straight onto the phone these days. And if I have any ideas and I'm sitting around, I just turn the phone on and whack through. Just do a quick little recording on the iPhone, and at some point I'll download all those and see where what's on there and what's any good. And actually, that song, Nothing I Can Say, we nearly lost that because that was like that, and I must have recorded that on a weekend away somewhere. And when we were going through the album, right at the end, I downloaded my phone and found that song on there, and I must have forgotten about it. So John said, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, well, that's the song. I've forgotten about that one." And pretty much word for word and note for note, it was all there on that single recording from somewhere 6 months before, on a weekend away somewhere. So yeah. Wow. So the trouble with that is if your phone packs it in, you swap it over, I lose all the little recordings.
You lose your... Oh, dear.
But I've remembered most of them. That's all right.
So what's the extent of current overseas interest in Airplay? What's happening over there?
Well, I just got something. We've got a sort of PR guy over in Sweden who's looking after it in Europe, and he just sent me something today where it's sort of getting airplay in Amsterdam and Norway, and a lot of the alternative, very similar to here. There's a lot of community radio stations, so we're picking up that. We were number 31 on the Americana chart, which is the APD Americana chart, which I think is to do with votes and downloads by radio stations in the States, and so that was for the whole of the States. So we're happy to be in the top 50 in the States, but that's in the Americana chart. We're just a bit out on the country chart, but anyway, it's pretty good. So, and yeah. So I mean, as far as there's so much music in the world now, and it's interesting. You put all this work into a CD and you put it out there, and 4 weeks later it's swamped by another 50 million CDs.
Yeah.
And I remember I still remember the days when we used to sort of record onto beta tape and post the beta tape off to Sydney, and you'd get a test pressing back, and we'd play it, and the record would come out, but you'd be lucky to have 3 records released in Australia in that week.
Mm.
So the record would hang around for a while, and over the years of playing, I've become pretty good friends with a lot of the radio people that play us down here, and and Dave Hurd and stuff says, well, look, he might get anything up to 200 CDs a week now given to him on any given week, just for one radio program. So, it's just so much music, and it's hard to expect, and with all the downloading and everything, the sales aren't really there anymore.
Yeah.
But it's the sort of thing we do. If we can do an album every couple of years, and we flog them at the gigs and see how far you can go, and it's on CD Baby now, so people are buying it on Amazon and all that sort of stuff. So.
Oh, good.
But you never know where that's at until a year later, and you catch up and see how many you sold.
And
we're nearly ready for another pressing, so that means we've gone all right.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah.
And before I let you go, what's the plan for the rest of this year?
Well, we're looking doing a little launch coming back. We're hoping. I'm just talking to Brian Cadd and Russell Morris, who John works with a fair bit when he's over here, and hopefully, if they can get him out here, we'll sort of snag him for a little tour as well and work something out there. I've had an offer to look at Norway gigs, which is later in the year. Okay. But we'll see. We might do Norway and Germany. We'll just see how we go with that. But yeah, I think there's a little Cannes festival on the move. And we've applied for a hell of a lot of festivals, but as you know, it's all pretty hard. So.
Absolutely.
keep plugging away.
And John was in the Burritos the same time as Brian, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I think
So-
Brian came after, or John met him and suggested that, you know, he'd come and help him out with the singing. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, look, thanks for your time.
No worries, John.
Enjoying the music so far, and we're sure there's plenty more good stuff ahead.
Okay, thanks, John.
Much appreciated.
See ya.
Bye-bye.